And we both thank you as well for
Yes.
taking time out of your Saturday to be with us. So Nida, I think that I'd like to start by just simply saying something that Tally said, which is that the work does really grab you. When I came to the gallery to familiarize myself with the work, I was literally just mesmerized by it. And I'd like for you to talk to us a little bit about the way in which you envisioned having this conversation, because it's a serious and kind of heavy conversation, and I'd like for us to kind of get your feeling, your ideas about how that came to you, that this is a conversation that needs to be had here in Dallas.
Thank you so much for that question. Well, this body of work was made in the past 2.5 years. And I feel like when an artist is making work in a studio and the work is up in the gallery, and what it doesn't end there. I think it sort of helps conversations to happen. And those conversations forms discourses. And I think that's where role of an artist or role of a creator or a community comes in, to sort of create a dialogue around the works that are there on the wall. But what can we do? How can we add our little block to what already exists, So I think, and that is why I felt like it's important to have that kind of conversation, for the work to not just stop there and have it sort of regurgitate in our minds.
And one of the things we talked about when I came was this notion of, I immediately went to the conversation on immigration, and then I realized after we had talked and I lived with the work for a while that really what you're doing is you're having a conversation about otherness and the way in which otherness plays out in America. And if you could speak a little bit about that as a notion in this work.
Of course. As I said, it's interesting. This body of work was made while I was a student at SMU. And a lot of it is informed by the structure that I experienced there. And of course, before I came to the US, I mean, it's interesting how this work goes sort of way back to my childhood drawings. The houses, the roofs that are there. We, as children born in Iran, Pakistan, India, we draw houses that are a square and a rectangle and a triangle on top. So these roofs, these triangular roofs we don't really live in, but we draw them. We don't live in triangular roof houses. We live in flat roof houses. The first time that I ever lived in that kind of house was when I moved here 7 years ago, but not before. But as a child, me, my sisters, and everybody that I knew, our ideals of a house was that.
And where did that come from?
And so that came from, of course, what we were exposed to as children. Sesame Street, the books that we grew. I mean, I watched Cinderella, Little Mermaid, and all of that growing up. So we kind of grew up with that, and so that's our source, right? And so, but then that's living. And then I came here. That idea of a house was the idea of someone else's house, and then that sort of, and then I was working with the idea of a house even before I came here, but it hit me that I never lived in that house here, and so that idea carried into SMU, and that is where I did not really see myself represented in the curriculum, represented in faculty, represented in student structure. I felt like I'm standing there outside really struggling to make the faculty come into my shoes and really understand where I'm coming from.
And what kinds of conversations, therefore, would you have had around your aesthetic? If you're coming from a place of creating an aesthetic that has its roots in something that you're not even seeing represented in MFA program that you're in. What kind of conversations could you have been having with faculty around this aesthetic that you were creating?
So it was interesting. In SMU, I had a lot of support. They were faculty like Lauren, like Amber, and Nadia, and Barnaby, Michael Kors. So I had faculty who gave me little by little. And it's really not about individuals. I'm not talking here about individuals
I'm
who
talking
didn't.
about the art.
I'm talking about the structure that everybody else, including the faculty, follows. You know? So it's really, and every faculty in that university gave me something. But I found it hard for them to understand where I'm coming from. You know? At the end of the day, the work was decorative. At the end of the day, the work was too angry. At the end of the day, the work was hurting people. You know, it was uncomfortable. You know, I felt like the faculty sometimes and the critics, it was hard for them to say something to me, although they would, but it was hard for them to say something to me because they didn't know if it was right. Or so if we have that kind of teacher-student relationship where I feel like the knowledge of like how do we say that to her? And of course, whenever it would come out wrong. You know what I mean? So so it's interesting. It was an interesting dynamic in there where I felt like I'm there and they don't know what to do with me. You know what I mean? There's like, okay, you know, let's just keep on, keep at it.
And did you feel that that was as much weighted on the side of your Southeast Asian background as it was you being a woman? I mean, was
it? Of course. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. I mean, I think a lot of the conversation was around, why don't you paint? You're a painter. You've been painting. You know, the expectations, you know, is, you know, we're gonna wait for her to start painting back again. This is maybe transitory. She's just too, you know. So the expectations that a person from the National College of Arts, Lahore, trained in miniature painting discipline must paint. You know.
Putting you in the box.
I think so. I mean, there were so many boxes that I fit into, right? I fit in the brown box, I fit into the other box, I fit into the women box, the mother box, the American, Pakistani, Iranian. I mean, I fit into so many boxes. And I understand that, you know. My practice is now how I navigate through them, you know, without fitting in too perfectly into any one of them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think, you know, that's what we're seeing. You know, is in these works we're seeing a real struggle to figure out where. I mean, you're boxed in this one, but you're breaking rules as a result of being in the box, and no matter how much is mounted on you. So, talk a little bit about as you began to understand that, you know, you weren't going to be in the box. You know, you were going to keep moving and exploring and doing whatever it is you felt like you had to do aesthetically. Talk to us about what then did you begin to look for support for these conversations that you wanted to have?
So Dallas itself and the community that's, the structures that it has supported was, of course, a constant source of inspiration. You know what I mean? It's a constant source of, okay, so this is happening to me. Let's go back and see how it has happened in other forms. And so, you know, it's full of it, you know. And so, you know, I would constantly go back to artists or look at artists, and even back in Lahore, I would constantly go back and visit and look at how those lines sort of converge. You know what I mean? And they were, for example, Lauren and Amber, so both of them are faculty that are in the institutions ready to give, but there's a lot of friction. They're women, they're people of color, and they're constantly sort of facing that resistance. And so you source that. And then you source what you are. I'm a woman, and I'm a practicing artist that decided to go back to school while I had a 2.5-year-old and a 4-year-old daughter, you know, and I decided to do this. And then, so I know my responsibilities, I know what sits in my back, and I see what I'm juggling with. So I sort of sourced from my experiences as well as what was going around, and how my experience sort of intersect with other experiences of people around me.
And I guess thinking of that being the way in which you began to move and support yourself and the work that you wanted to do, I'm curious though as to whether or not you had a moment of thinking, well, I'm really not planted in my cultural aesthetic, and I'm moving in a way that I'm not really speaking to Americans, so to speak, in the things that I'm trying to say in America. Did you see yourself as being sort of really in a separate world, in neither that world nor this world, but you know, sort of creating your own?
I'm kind of used to that. I'm very used to not being part of any world, because I was born in Iran, and I grew up both in Iran and Pakistan. And growing up, because I was raised in Kohat, really, for most part of my life, Parachinar and Kohat. Parachinar is a tribal area, and it borders Afghanistan. And Kohat is a very small town of Pakistan. It's a small town, you know. So I hated being there, you know. And I wanted to be back in Iran because all my cousins, all my relatives, were there. So we didn't really have much relatives in Kohat. I mean, we did in Islamabad. They were cities away, but then I didn't want to be in Pakistan until I really came to, because it was very secluded. You know, there were restrictions on women. It's a small town. You know, it's not like Islamabad or Lahore or Karachi where women can do whatever they want to do. So I really grew up I was raised in that little town, and I always wanted to go back to Iran. But when you're in Iran, your home is in Pakistan, right?
So you're always between.
And then you're between these lines. And then when I came to NCA, I realized, oh, Pakistan is much more than women boxed into these homes and not really being allowed to do. Because NCA Lahore gives you wings, you know? And that's the special part about being an artist and being in Lahore. Part of that really dynamic world is that you start really growing. And my attachment to Pakistan really started from there. I wanted to be called Pakistani. Before that, I was like, I'm just Iranian. That's it. But then I was thinking, oh, so all my life before being 18, I wanted to be not called Pakistan. So it was, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then now I'm here, and I'm like, okay, I'm Iranian, I'm Pakistani. Am I really American? My kids are. But I'm so constantly negotiating identities. You know, I'm constantly between the lines and not really here or there. I'm kind of living between the borders of even language, you know. Raised in Pakistan, we would always speak in Farsi, and that is a language of Iran. My father was like, do not speak to me in Urdu or Pashto, although we knew that, because I would forget. That's not my mother language, and I'll forget. So we would speak to Farsi in Farsi with Baba. And then now here I am with 2 daughters struggling to teach Farsi to them. Well, they're not really, but you know, my husband is speaking Urdu with them. I'm speaking Farsi with them. We're hoping, you know, they'll be able to read Saadi when they're 18. That's not gonna, you know what I mean? But so, you know, and then it's just, these borders, these lines.
I guess I can't avoid asking the question because it's such a thing that happened, but I have to imagine that after 9/11 that you began to see some other kinds of realities about being here. In what ways did you, if at all, shift in your thinking about the work that you wanted to do? Because I would imagine that you were beginning to see certain realities about how America viewed the Middle East, and specifically, the way in which they didn't know much about the Middle East.
So I was not here during 9/11. I was back in Lahore, and then so I think I came to U.S. in a very naive. I had a very naive mindset. I was made to believe, of course, through media, through that those troubles that are back home are not here. That the class that we talk about back home is kind of translated to something else here, but it exists here. You know what I mean? And so I think I came to the US in 2013, I believe. So it was much later, and I came here thinking I'm coming into a different world because that's what I saw through media, through films.
So media, which media are you talking about?
Through films, right? Through films, through books, through whatever like America is Hollywood, right? Right? You come here with that mindset. And then you come here, you land in Texas, and
it is Hollywood.
You're like, okay. I lived in Coppell, Irving. And then I was like, okay, so I moved from Lahore to Delhi, maybe, that's all. Because it's little India, you know what I mean? You're like, oh, it's India, You have Indian food, oh, great, I do not see, And then you go to SMU, and you're like, oh, okay, like that, okay, this is different. Highland Park, this is different, And so it's just these pockets. I mean, you think about before that I was in London, right? And then Australia, and you do see mix. I mean, of course, London is like a hub. It's like central New York. You do see a lot of mixture coexisting, In Coppell, you don't, In Highland Park, you don't. So Dallas Metroplex is a hub of like all these different colors, but we live in pockets. We live around the edges, in the periphery. I mean, I'm half Iranian, I'm half Pakistani. It's interesting how Iranians live in Richardson, and Pakistanis live in Plano and Frisco, and
Right.
So we're still in pockets. And so when I meet my Pakistani friends, they're separate. I meet my Irani friends, they're separate. I meet my American friends, they're separate. So it's little pockets.
And how did that, if at all, how did that reality influence what you began to work on as a body of work?
So, I mean, yeah. Excuse me. So as I moved here, I thought, oh, okay, so this is not. Women are struggling with the same issues, maybe with the varying degrees that we're working there,
You said something to me that really struck me because, we have this image of this is what we're fed, is that, the Middle East, women are repressed, and you said to me, well, I mean, I've lived in places where there are women presidents and you sort of don't have one here. And I thought, well,
yes.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. I mean, Benazir was the president of and it's, I believe the first women president of. So, and I come here and I say, okay, people in New York with their pink hats are fighting the same things that we're fighting on the roads when Khawateen march, with women march in Lahore. We're basically talking about the same thing. So why was I in this bubble thinking, oh, it was,
Yeah.
And then so it's interesting how I remember Lawrence asked me once, she's like, when the immigrants know that they'll be treated like this in the US, why do they still choose to come? Do they come for the American dream? And I said, there are different classes. As an immigrant, my husband was internally transferred, so I'm a completely different class of immigrant. But there are immigrant families that I'm working with. You have to understand, they live in a world maybe without internet, they don't know what they're getting into. They don't know how they'll be treated when they come. They really do not have outlet news. Imagine if you're in Kashmir right now. It's been 90 plus days of cutout, and you just want to get out. And then there are people there taking a lot of money from you, giving you or taking your passports and putting you in cars and sending you somewhere, and you trust them with your life. And they tell you this is where we're sending you. And you go, So they don't really know. And I feel like I was something like that, but in a very much more wrongly informed. My information was wrong, I can't say I didn't have any information, I did, but it was manipulated. It was constructed, it was curated, that information that I got through the films, I was talking about post-colonial theory when I came here, but really when you live, and I think I'll be able to build on it, rather than talk about the same things. But I feel like I had to start from here, and making my viewers recognize that it exists. Like in Pakistan, we recognize it exists because we've lived it.
Right.
But here, it's almost like I'm struggling to make people recognize that it exists.
So what is the significance of these pieces in this particular area being all white?
Okay, so that's a very strong and interesting question. When we think about race, we think about brown, we think about black, we don't think about white as much. Whereas I think that is the race that kind of defines all the other, the tone of every other race. It's interesting how if you put white in brown, it kind of changes color. So it makes it lighter. So the works here really explore whiteness, not as people, but as structure. The structure that I have, that is really a part of me now. That I am trained to, my body is trained to keep that structure intact through institutions, through culture, through way of life, So really the reason why this is all imperial white china teacups over a white table, and I'm wearing white shalwar kameez. And so that all signifies that my body is trained to keep the labor of whiteness intact. And what do I mean by that? By that I mean we still have fairness creams back in our home. I think fair is prettier. If you speak English, you belong to a different class. A lot of venues are open for you. If you wear a certain dress, you belong to a different class. So we still are under those, and I embrace all of that. You know what I mean? My first NCA was made by Kipling, to revive the dying art of subcontinent. And I am result. I did not only my bachelor's, but also my master's. And it's interesting. And then tying this work to that work was to the miniature paintings that are inside. Paintings that are inside. It's interesting how I'm still training myself. So miniature painting, we still call it miniature painting, whereas it was never miniature painting, right? It was Fane Musavri, Musavri being Musavvir being one of the 99 names of God. So it basically connects a painter to the maker, right? And then Europeans looked at it and they're like, oh, it's their miniatures, because they looked at size. So first they reduced it to to only the size. And then they said miniatum, because red pigment that is used in the text and paintings, it's called miniatum. So it also refers to the word miniatum. So material and size reduced the art form that was connecting you to the higher order to material. And now we have, and of course we institutionalized it. Now NCA gives a degree in miniature painting. And we have practicing artists who have made another movement called neo-miniatures. You know, because that was not enough.
Wasn't miniature enough.
Yeah, you know that. So because, and now it's like neo-miniature painting movement. To fit it into a box that is, so we're whitewashing. You know, we are the one who are doing it now.
It's like you said, it's the structural system that allows anyone that's been colonized to just sort of move into that system and not question it.
Yes.
You know, and over time it becomes institutionalized even in the people once they are so-called freed. Yeah.
And I think more importantly, I mean, address it is different. Even recognizing it is, you know, is something. I've been into conversations here where in institutions where I feel that it's not even recognized, you know?
Well, it can't really be recognized if it's not even discussed. You know, it's like one of the problems with race in this country is it's the taboo subject. You know, no one really wants to talk about it. It's difficult, it's painful, and having honest conversations about it almost always creates real problems. So it doesn't get talked about. And then, you know, anybody knows that if there's a sore that you have and you just allow it to be untreated, it doesn't heal. You know, it just festers. And sooner or later, you gotta treat it. You know, I think that's how we approach race in this country. So the idea that you can't address something that you can't even discuss without it becoming, you know, that big elephant in the room.
Yeah. And I don't know, I mean, it's messy, and I get it, but why does it always has to be not messy?
I just think that's the way we're socialized. I mean, we're socialized to avoid conflict, not to go to conflict. I mean, I wasn't, obviously, y'all know me. But most people are socialized to avoid conflict. And, you know, to me, any problem that's going to get solved is probably going to have conflict in it somewhere. You know, that you have to understand that that's part of solving the problem. Is you get to the conflict, then you resolve it. So I think that's the resistance. And you know, when you're making work that kind of forces a different conversation, that, as you said, it's why the artist can become that thorn in the side if they are willing to do that investigation. I think you're definitely investigating something that makes us look at another level of, you know, well, what is this? What is she saying with all of this? You know, you can't walk in here and look at this and just sort of go, oh, it's dishes on the table and there's a woman underneath the table, and then that's the end of that. You're forced to start analyzing this and start trying to figure this out. And I think that's what struck me, was that, you know, the work is very powerful.
Thank you.
And even though it's simple in its presentation, it's very powerful. I don't even know if people are looking at all the, I mean, I noticed the blood, you know, all of the things that are very provocative in terms of me wanting to know more. So, you know, I think that kind of capsulizes why we avoid the difficult in favor of the decorative, which you were saying, you know, someone would say the work is decorative, rather than look at that work and say, well, there's got to be something more to this. I wonder what that is, you know, to just dismiss it as decorative.
Yeah. And I mean, there's another word, I mean, I constantly think decorations like Halloween decorations maybe, but I mean there's a term ornament for it. I mean you can say it's ornamental, and I'm gonna be very pleased, but decorative is reductive, you know. Ornament is more powerful because it contains
that's an interesting way to look at it.
a lot,
Yeah.
you know. Ornament is not there to just please.
It has meaning. It has yes.
Yes, it has philosophy. It has a reason of being there, you know.
So I'm curious to know what you are thinking beyond this work. What are you thinking next? What's next in terms of the next conversation you want to have? And will it be around these same issues around feminist activity, otherness? What are your next thoughts of?
Of course, I mean, the work has always had all of these, I mean, I can't even say pinpoint as to what it is. I mean, it talks about the domestic, it talks about feminine, it talks about personal, it talks about history, it talks about the colonial, it talks about power structures, and much more. And of course, about traveling, about movement, about homes. And of course, that is always going to be part of the work. And of course, it's never going to be really bound by medium, you know.
Well, speak about that, because I mean, you know, in this, you have everything from traditional painting, you know, to photography, to video and some performance, to performative video.
Yep.
So you have really sort of gone the gamut of just this show. Are you thinking more in terms of performance or installation? Or?
I mean, it's so interesting. I never think, okay, I want to perform, and then I do. It's always an idea, and how can I deliver that best? How can this really say what I want to say best? I mean, those houses that are constantly tarnishing and you know, in the other room, the roofs, because they're done on 3 white pigments, titanium, zinc, and permanent white, and then there's silver and copper line on it, and they're constantly tarnishing. So you see them today, you see them a month from now, they've changed. So the pigments are changing those silver lines. That medium could do best, photographs couldn't. And then there's video. There's a difference between that and this. When you hear the breath, when you see the struggle, and then when you see, oh, I'm looking at one side and I can't see a body, so it's invisibilizing. One side of the wall is invisibilizing my body, the other side of the wall is invisibilizing the dirtiness of the cups. So there's limited information on both sides of the wall. So that could not be done with a painting.
Right.
You know? So it's really, what do I want to say? So, and then I think about how I want to say it. So as an artist, for me, yes, trained in the discipline of miniature painting, not traditional miniatures, but miniature painting allows me to challenge it and see how I can push the boundary of that. And it really, all of this really started from there. Because when you're trained as a miniature painter in Lahore, everybody's like, oh, work on Basli, work on paper, and that's it. So I always wanted to not be that. So, and that pushed me to explore different things. But then it's interesting how, I mean, first love is first love, right. You know? And so even if I'm making videos and photographs, it's always consciously, unconsciously sourced from the flatness of the surface that doesn't want to be anything else, and it just wants to be that, you know? So it's the videos, again, are very still. The photographs are there. They have minimum editing. So they really, I think, kind of want to mimic being a painting. And my paintings want to mimic being a video because they're constantly moving. They're changing, they're tarnishing. So I like those I like those intersections again, because they kind of reference how I live between the lines.
And I'm also interested in the sound quality of these videos, because I like the fact that you really just sort of allowed the natural sound. You didn't try to incorporate, manufactured sounds into it. Can you talk a little bit about how you see sound working in your pieces?
Mm-hmm. So it's interesting how you talk about that, because I was making a work. It was again based on whitewashing. So it was it is two-channel video installation where it's kind of, they're installed on opposite sides of the wall and the viewer is in the middle. So on one channel, I'm just erasing the whitewash, on the other one, I'm just applying the white on the screen. So all you see is like somebody just whitewashing, so you can't see me all as a whole, you just see me through this veil, and on the other one, I'm just scratching it. So I always wanted there to be a sound, and I sort of reached out for almost a year. I've been reaching out to these musicians, and it is not working. And I'm kind of going back to that scratching and that washing sounds, because I think just the mundaneness of the objects, like a teacup and tea and table, and I think these sounds have the potential to really elevate. Like the simple has the potential to really elevate. And I think it's interesting how my work, the way my process work, it kind of goes from really too much to, and then I strip it down, and then say, okay, I got it. So I kind of go all really...
Edit.
It has a lot of, and that is why like one work takes a year and a half, 2 years to really, so before this work, in an exhibition, I prepared English breakfast tea in the same teacups, and I served it to my audience. So that was also part of a performance, and it's part of this body of work.
And what did that show you? I mean, what did you get out of that performance?
So it was interesting how it was a big show, so with a lot of people, and then a lot of people were participating in it. So I decided to give tea, to serve chai, English breakfast tea with Mary biscuits and sugar cubes. And then, so everybody said, oh, this is so kind of you to sort of bring in your culture and sharing it with us, and thank you so much for serving us tea and all of that. And then, so once I did, and then the cups were stacked up very neatly on a white table, like one on top of each other. And then, so 1.5 hours, it was a 3-hour performance where I served tea, and then once everything was done, I picked up a white bucket and a white sponge, and I started scrubbing them and putting them back in order. And then, so then they were like, oh, are we supposed to tip her? Is she performing? Is that art? Like, it was like...
They weren't sure what you were doing, right?
And they were not at all sure that they were part of this.
Mm-hmm.
And there were 72 teacups referring to 72 years of Pakistan, India independence and the Europeans. So it's a very recent history, like my father, had he be alive, he had seen partition. You know what I mean? It's very first generation, So, and 72 years of independence at that time, now 2 years have passed. But then here I am still serving tea and cleaning the teacups and putting them back in order like I'm supposed to do, And then that sat there, and then, and before that, so that happened, the teacups and the service happened, and then this was a year and a half before where I lifted the daybed with the guy on it. And then I was sitting with that and thinking, how can that go somewhere else? And then I kind of lifted this table on which, so it was really a process.
Right.
There's a carpet piece when you enter in the middle gallery, that sat in my studio for 3 years. I didn't know what to do with it. Part of traditional art practice, we were supposed to do carpet weaving. 6 months, I weaved the carpet, 6 months, 12 hours a day, 10 to 12 hours a day. It was just, and I said, I give up. I really give up, and I just let it go. And then it was sitting in the studio. I finished my MFA. 2 years later, I revisited it. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to open it up, and it's going to turn into a house. So it's threadbare, not because it was used, but because I set myself for an impossible task. You know? And so all of this work, you kind of set yourself up to fail, and then you see what happens in the process. You know what I mean?
It's an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah, yeah.
So, I want to get back to the sounds, though. Are you thinking in other ways of using sound as, because it's very effective, especially when we're in a gallery when it's quiet and you're in here by yourself. It's very effective how those sounds sort of create almost a visceral reaction in you. The grunting, you know. Are you thinking more about how that might be incorporated in some of the work that you'll do in the future?
Yeah.
I mean, because I can almost see you doing some sound work that is not necessarily dependent on visual.
I mean, I did a whistle piece where I whistled. I mean, I do sound pieces as well, and they're usually on radios. Oh. So there was a Radio Azad. I mean, this is way back when I just whistled the national anthem of Pakistan, because the first national anthem of Pakistan was written by a Hindu, and then it was in Urdu, which is the language of Pakistan. But then later they realized, oh, like a Hindu can't write a Muslim's national anthem, so we'll get a Muslim to write our anthem, and then ironically that's in Farsi, which is the language of Iran. So now Pakistan has a national anthem that majority of Pakistanis don't understand what it is because it's in Farsi. I understand it because I know Farsi,
right.
But there's only one Urdu word in it, Pak Sar Zameen Ka. So Ka is the only Urdu word in it, rest everything is Farsi. So
that's bizarre.
It is, you know, and I didn't realize that. Until, I mean, we would all sing national anthem in the beginning of every, yeah, and you don't get it, really? Oh yeah, you don't, you know? So I whistled the current national anthem, and then had a beautiful reader with a strong voice read the first one, which was Urdu and which everybody could really understand. So yes, sound is something exciting to me. Of course, I think there's a place for it, and it comes really naturally, but of course sound has always been part of. And also silence. The sound of silence is something
we're not
very
used to dealing with
strong.
silence in this country.
Yes.
So we'd like to open this up to the audience if you all have any questions that you would like to ask.
Just like I did not answer any of Vicki's questions. She was asking a question, I was just like, tangent.
It's okay though, it's good stuff, good stuff.
Yes.
Jeff.
We'll see about that. In your studies in developing your artistic career, how much of the program dealt with self-advocacy? And the reason I thought of that is you were talking to you've got all these lines that you're negotiating, all these boxes in which you fit. But do they teach you how to advocate for yourself, or is this something that you have to just kind of learn on your own? I think you're awfully good self-advocate in the discussion here, but I'm curious.
Well, unfortunately, no.
Yeah, that's not part of art education.
It's not. I've been into many art institutions around the world, and it's safe to say that no, that's the last thing on. It should be, but it's not.
And it's amazing that in 2020, that's still the case. That, I mean, as artists, we're still being educated as if we were going to art school in the 1800s.
Yeah, I mean, we have a daughter who's a studio arts major at the University of New Mexico, and it's one of the things I've observed. I mean, now, at her stage, it's not like you're in an MFA program, but it's sort of the same thing. You're taught to do X, but you're not taught to talk about why it is you're doing X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. Yep. And I think that, I mean, I'm not saying, I think there has to be professional practices, serious professional practices, taught in institutions. That it was not something I learned in HCA. That was not something I learned in my first MFA and my second MFA and everything in the middle. But it is something that you get when you learn from others, you know. It is something that sort of comes with time. My first MFA was 2008, you know, and now it's 2019. And then it has been a struggle, that learning. I've made blunders. I mean, some of the blunders that I tell you, you'll sit and laugh.
In those 11 years as well, you have some children.
Yes. And I've moved continents, you know, Australia, London, US, Madagascar, I mean, a lot, you know. So you kind of have to, and the good thing with art is that it helps you travel. So it gives you access to learning.
Well, thank you for answering my question.
Thank you. I know you're worried for your daughter, but she'll be fine. Vicki will say.
I went to SMU about 10 years ago. I did art history and dance, and I just called it racist. I mean, I was told if I ever came to class in brown tights again, I would be kicked out of the departments. And now Grishko sells brown point shoes, so I don't like these people. But I lived overseas for 2.5 years in New Zealand, and I was there for grad school. I had work experience, all of these things. And I was constantly told, well, you're black, you have to do a service role. And so I also had locks at the time, and I did. I was a maid, and I worked in food service, and even trying to get food service jobs, they would say, you can't serve food here because it's too high end, and you're black. And so this really, I thought that's what this was about, was service roles and service positions, serving white people. And anytime I made food, the customers would complain that ethnic girl put too much barbecue sauce on it. I'm like, I'm from Texas. And I remember that, you know, we were cleaning toilets and they stopped the whole hotel. It was like a bed and breakfast that I didn't get behind the toilet. I mean, I was a very, very outspoken person, so I used a lot of strong language with these people. But yeah, it just really made me think of serving food service, and yeah, the cage that you're put in, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, kind of thing. So it really struck me right away. That's what I took from it.
Well, it's interesting how you say that, because this work is really coming out of me being made to wash teacups at SMU. You know, as simple as that. I'm not boasting, but I have a lot to give. I really do. I mean, I applied to be a faculty of that institution before I was told that maybe you should be a student. I was an assistant professor in a university back home, yet where I was TAing at SMU, I was made to wash cups in a gallery, you know, while students much younger than I was in a different positions. TAing, but TAing for, you know.
And the big sigh,
You know? I mean, I'm gonna try not, but when I was washing the teacups, I was crying. And I said, I am not gonna write a fancy email to the dean and tell them what is going on. I'm gonna process it. And actually make people listen. Not in a letter, but what I am good at doing, hopefully. And here I am. You know, maybe writing letters was not something that had to be done.
It's a waste of time.
You know, yeah, doing was. And you know, when people say, well, you make, you don't do, well, that's doing.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
I really admire that.
Thank you. Yes.
To your point, to both ladies' points, I heard a quote once that I'm sure other people have as well, but the burden of explaining being a minority is placed on the minority. And when I saw your work and the cups being stacked upon it, the burden is all on the person, the people experiencing, or that person experiencing it. And I always wondered why is it always the minority, and isn't there a better dialogue between the two? So I just, that's what I thought.
Yep. Thank you. Yeah, I agree with that. Yes.
So I'm now asking something totally different. Looking at these photographs, in the first time when I came, they so appeared to me like painterly, right? And it's now right now as I'm looking at those shades already, those 2, 3 dots white, it's like and I was like, when you start saying you were a painter, but then you said you were a different type of painter. Like, have you ever thought about that? How you executed the photographs, how they turned out? Because they seem kind of like either like painters painting from photographs or something. I don't know. It was very interesting as I'm looking at them.
Yes. Of course. I mean, as I said, I treat everything from the background that I've had. So it's always through that lens. I spent a lot of time with these photographs. There were maybe thousands of it that I selected, and there is a movement in it. There's, I sort of had to bring that baggage. Yes. And then even in the videos, you can see that and I'm proud of it. I'm glad you saw it. I'm glad you saw it.
I think we have time for one more question.
Yes.
I have a question. I wonder if you could comment on, curious, what you feel like the meaning of the pictures would have been if the liquid was maybe coffee or not dry.
Well, the same history. Yeah. You see coffee, and a lot of people really actually think they're coffee, but it's really the same history. I mean, green tea, now we have all the yogis, but let's not forget where it came from. It's really, I'm thinking of a lot of teas and coffees services, hopefully in future.
Well,
Thank you all so much. Vicki, Nida, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
We have refreshments, and we'd love for you to stay as long as you like until 5. I think what comes across in hearing the comments and what I've heard having the show up since early January is that as much as it is about your personal experience, which so much great art is so personal and sometimes private for the artist, it has this universal appeal. There's so many different interpretations that individuals, they see themselves in you, and it could be about race, it could be about geography, it could be about immigration, it could be about motherhood.
Yes.
And you talked about that, and the domestic, and it's just, I think that's a real, Vicki touched on it when you gave the opening remarks, it triggered all these questions. What is this? This is about something, and it's just so well done. And thank you both for your time.
Thank you.
And I encourage everyone to continue this conversation and visit with these 2 wonderful artists. And thank you for coming, and thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.